Thank you. I'm here representing UMass Students for Justice in Palestine. I'd like to begin our case against UMass by letting them speak for themselves. These quotes, or this quote, is taken from a 2021 UMass report titled Next: Frontiers in Aerospace, Defense, Undersea Technologies, and Remote Sensing. The report openly and proudly discusses UMass's myriad ties to the Department of Defense through the development of remote sensor technology, exoskeletons for troops, AI-driven cybersecurity programs, drones, satellites, and many other military technologies. But the smoking gun here is the line, "We will contribute to the DoD's goal of multi-domain operational dominance." If you can cut through the jargon, which is no small feat, we need to ask ourselves, what does multi-domain operational dominance of the United States security state entail? It entails war. It entails imperialism and occupation. It entails genocide. UMass, through its participation in research for the Department of Defense, is not merely complicit, it is an active participant in the war machine. There's the other quote. I forgot how slides work. I will turn now to our other main defendant, RTX, formerly known as Raytheon Technologies. Just like UMass, I figured I would let them speak for themselves. Take it from their former CEO, Greg Hayes, who says, "Look, peace is not going to break out in the Middle East anytime soon. I think it remains an area where we will see continued growth." Shame. What do they think about the climate crisis? It's great. It's going to cause demand for their products and services to rise. Russian invasion of Ukraine, fantastic opportunity for international sales. They are rubbing it in our faces. Raytheon and its contemporaries in the defense industry are not mere suppliers of weaponry. They are immensely wealthy power brokers with a vested interest in the maintenance of a war economy. And a war economy requires wars. We'll turn now to the specific manifestations of Raytheon-enabled war crimes. In the latter half of the 2010s, Raytheon came under fire for its sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia, which at that point was engaged in a devastating air campaign in Yemen. The campaign directly killed 15,000 civilians, and over 300,000 more died due to famine and disease caused by the relentless bombardment. There are also several documented instances of the use of Raytheon-made munitions in the massacres of civilians, many of whom were children. Despite their obvious complicity in these war crimes, Raytheon not only continued to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, but they lobbied hard against any attempts by the government to block sales. Their $15 million lobbying campaign, which included over $4.5 million in donations to sitting American senators, successfully preserved the flow of blood money into their pockets. Shame. As one of the most prolific providers of weaponry and technology to the IDF, there are few corporate entities that bear more responsibility for the destruction of Gaza than Raytheon. Raytheon produces several different types of bombs and missiles used by Israel, including the 5,000-pound GBU-28 bunker buster bomb used to level entire city blocks. Raytheon also supplies an array of necessary parts for Israel's fleet of F-16 fighter jets. Raytheon designed the Phalanx system that enforces the naval blockade of Gaza and shoots Gazan fishermen. And it helps to supply and maintain Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. All of this death and destruction has been remarkably lucrative for them. In 2024, Raytheon made $80 billion in sales, a 17% increase from 2023. Their stock price has more than doubled since October 7th, 2023. These staggering figures should force us to confront the undeniable truth A world where profiteering off of genocide is acceptable is a world that makes genocide inevitable. We must also confront Raytheon's role in constructing the domestic security state. Highlighted as one of 14 giants in the border security business, Raytheon is a major contractor for U.S. Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, with contracts for tracking and monitoring devices, satellites, ground systems, and surveillance and radar systems for maritime drones, among other technologies. It also managed Project Athena, an integrated surveillance system that led to the detention and killings of thousands of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. As for its ties to the prison industrial complex, there is the incredibly disturbing example of the, quote, assault intervention device that Raytheon designed and provided to a Los Angeles prison. Designed as a non-lethal stun weapon, the device, quote, blasts millimeter beams that simulate intense heat, which is described to feel like if you just opened up the doors of a blast furnace. Besides Raytheon, UMass is invested elsewhere in the prison industry, most notably in Geo Group, a private prison company, and Palantir, the infamous surveillance and tech firm. I'm now going to pass it off to my comrade from PSU, who's going to explain the concrete ties between UMass and these horrors.
This tribunal answers the Palestinians' people's call for solidarity. For decades, Palestinians have asked us to resist empire by boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel and the US. On behalf of students, faculty, and staff at UMass, I join all other organizations in saying no more to genocide and no more to our institutional complicity. This tribunal is another opportunity to be brave together, express our solidarity, and reject war profiteers. Just a few weeks ago, the student movement blocked the campus career fair because companies like Raytheon and L3Harris are our university's special guests. Since 2014, Raytheon has paid UMass close to $10 million to defense contracts, labs, and special projects. In addition, UMass invests more than $20 million of its endowment in war profiteers and weapons manufacturers. Take a moment to imagine how else we could spend all that money. Consider what our beloved and beleaguered social thought and political economy program, STEPIC, could do with just a fraction of those funds. My own graduate program in humanities and fine arts is always in financial trouble, and my many union colleagues struggle to feed their families. Let me ask the crowd, what would you all rather fund with this money? But instead, UMass further cements its relationship with RTX, offering scholarships, tuition discounts, and career pipelines. The UMass-Raytheon special partnership goes back decades because an R1 university like ours, instead of providing life-affirming knowledge, has become a hub for the war machine's research and recruitment. Raytheon and Massachusetts. But our movement for solidarity also goes back decades. UMass and Hampshire College were some of the first institutions to divest from apartheid South Africa, not because administrators had a moment of moral clarity, but because students, staff, and faculty organized and disrupted business as usual. Likewise with fossil fuel divestment. Today, UMass is proud to have been one of the first to divest and brags about being environmentally responsible. But it was community members like us who pushed the university towards taking an ethical position. Why the struggle today to divest? Because the Palestinian exception is real. We have voted to divest. We have voted for divestment in our unions and student organizations. We have marched and rallied on campus. We have occupied buildings, set up solidarity encampments, held votes of no confidence, and built a broad coalition throughout the valley. We have exhausted all institutional avenues and gone through every official channel and received the same answer. UMass denies our request for divestment and chooses genocide, war, and profit. Administrators have also gone a step further by violently suppressing the student movement for a free Palestine. Hundreds have been arrested, beaten, and bullied. Community members have been banned from campus. Students have been doxxed by reactionaries, and professors are forced to censor their lesson plans. Meanwhile, Raytheon gets preferential treatment and direct access to labs, classrooms, and career fairs. We have been given no choice but to call this tribunal and charge the University of Massachusetts with complicity in the genocide of Palestine through its direct and long-standing relationship with Raytheon and the devastation Raytheon weapons rain upon Gaza. We once again call on UMass to boycott and divest from Israel and from the Israeli and US war machine. But more importantly, today I ask you all, our jury of comrades, to sanction UMass by finding them guilty of complicity and genocide. Before I yield the floor, I want to ask that as we charge UMass, we do not fall into their logic of punishment, retribution, and carcerality. Our movement is grounded in solidarity, dignity, and respect for our life. And because we are in the sacred sanctuary, we do not speak the language of punishment. Today, we speak the language of redemption. Today, we take one more step collectively towards building a better world. Long live Palestine, long live the student movements.
I'm back. While students were agitating against UMass's ties to Raytheon well before October 7th, 2023, the first major crackdown came on October 25th, 2023, 2 years ago to this day. Hundreds of students occupied Whitmore Administration Building, demanding to meet with Chancellor Javier Reyes to discuss demands of divestment from war profiteers and the cutting of all ties with Israel. When the building closed and Chancellor Reyes was still nowhere to be seen, 57 students opted to remain and were arrested on charges of trespassing. In a normal academic year, the arrest of 57 peaceful protesters would have been a shocking display of needless repression. Instead, UMass's response to the Gaza Solidarity encampment on May 7th made the response to the Whitmore sit-in seem quaint. To break up the encampment and disperse the protest, the Reyes administration summoned over 200 campus, town, and state police who arrested 138 students, faculty, staff, and community members. I was there on May 7th, and over the course of the night, I saw my fellow protesters punched, kicked, knelt on, choked, slammed to the ground, and beaten with batons by police officers. On multiple occasions, police charged at protesters in designated safe zones, and in one case, trampled a bystander, breaking their leg in 3 places. Upon being arrested, detainees were denied access to bathrooms and menstrual products and zip-tied tight enough to cause bleeding for hours on end. Given the brutality and the lawlessness of the conduct of police on that night, I do not think it is hyperbole to suggest that UMass's decision to call the police actively endangered the lives of its students. And the joint statement of the 5 largest unions in response to the chancellor's response says it best: the crime committed was the equivalent to jaywalking. Beyond its active endangerment of students through its invitation of police violence, UMass has also managed to passively endanger its students by way of neglecting to respond to hate speech and threats of violence. Our comrade from JVP went into the details of this earlier, but I want to highlight the statement by the Council on American Islamic Relations, which states that UMass is a hostile campus for Arab and Muslim students due to the hostile treatment of peaceful protesters and the discriminatory sanctions and pattern of neglect in addressing anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian harassment. UMass is also invested in surveillance and militarization prior to and since the breakup of the encampment. In the past 3 years, UMPD has purchased pepper spray grenades, $25,000 worth of firearms and ammunition, $5,000 worth of red dot sights, $90,000 worth of camera equipment, and biometric data software. Shame. But while UMass has been completely inept in protecting the legal rights of its students, it has been vociferous in its persecution of them. Last summer, the administration pursued felony riot charges against 2 student protesters who were not even arrested on May 7th. Thankfully, these charges were dropped following an outburst of anger and pressure from the UMass community, which should make it clear how bogus they were, but should also make even clearer the necessity of community-led institutions like this tribunal. If UMass will not hold itself accountable, then we must be the ones to hold power to account. In the wake of May 7th, UMass has made repeated attempts to save face, not by issuing demands or making amends or issuing apologies to its injured, beaten students, but by shoring up the legal grounds on which it breaks up demonstrations. The Campus Demonstration Policy Task Force, which was created to review and make recommendations on demonstrated relation policies, firmly upholds the rights of students to free speech with the following exceptions. They present a danger to the campus. They disrupt campus operations. They promote substantial disorder. They infringe upon the rights of others. These exceptions may sound reasonable in theory, but when in practice, they're so broad, arbitrary, and nebulously defined that they can be selectively enforced to shut down anything admin deems disruptive or disorderly. The recommendations made by the task force for de-escalation are also quite telling as to how they want students to protest. The task force suggests for intervening administrators to request demonstrators move to another, less disruptive location, decrease their volume, or suggest for the protest to be continued at a later date and time. The message comes through quite clear. You are free to protest however you like as long as nobody has to see or hear it. I'll now call up our expert witness to give further context into UMass's weaponization of bureaucracy to stifle any attempts at institutional reform. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kevin. I participate in Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine, as well as in the Faculty and Librarian Union, MSP, and in a group called Move Our Money, which is seeking UMass's full financial divestment from the fossil fuel industry. Now, in these capacities, I've been unlucky enough to often have a front row seat for hearing how UMass leaders justify their actions. So I want to address the 2 justifications that I've heard most frequently from the UMass administration. One is based on an ethical principle. The other is based on financial concerns. The ethical justification is that they must adhere to what they call institutional neutrality. And here they cite a 1967 document written by Professor Harry Calvin and 6 other faculty members at the University of Chicago. The Calvin Report, as it is commonly known, is celebrated by administrators across the United States, including here at UMass Amherst. Now, I'll leave aside for the moment the question of why any of us should feel bound
by the views of 7 men at the University of Chicago who clearly felt a bit uneasy about the creeping democratization of their campus and the society that they saw around them in 1967. All right. Now, the central thrust of the Calvin Report was the author's warning against a university taking, quote, collective action on the issues of the day, and thereby deviating from its, quote, neutrality as an institution. Taking an institutional position, they argued, risks infringing on the freedom of students and workers who disagree with the position taken. At its logical extreme, this argument suggests that by opposing a genocide, a university would be infringing on the rights of those who support that genocide. The Calvin Report is based on a false distinction between the political and the non-political. By its logic, divesting from genocide is a political action. Investing in genocide is neutral and non-political. The distinction is easy and convenient. My position, whatever it might be, is by definition neutral and non-political. My opponent's positions are biased and political. Right? Of course, a more honest position recognizes that all university policies are political. Every investment decision, every budget, every research contract is a political and moral document expressing unstated opinions about the way things should be. Now, the argument in the Calvin Report is not quite as crude and facile as I'm implying. The authors do concede that actions like boycotts and divestment by a university are sometimes justified. They were thinking especially of investments and revenue sources. In their words, the, quote, corporate activities of the university, interesting phrase, including its ownership of assets and, quote, its receipt of funds, may at times be so incompatible with paramount social values, end quote, as to require the institution to take a clear stand for justice. The later decisions by many universities to divest from apartheid South Africa, from the tobacco industry, from fossil fuel companies are examples of what the Calvin Report authors had in mind. And it would be difficult to argue today that funding a genocide is any less incompatible with paramount social values. This important nuance in the Calvin Report is ignored by today's university administrators at places like UMass. Right? They cite the report selectively as a way of justifying their current policies, whatever those policies might be. As Harry Calvin's own son, First Amendment scholar Jamie Calvin said in 2018, universities have, quote, used the Calvin Report as a kind of shield, right? Obviously to deflect calls for accountability. The second public justification that I've often heard from UMass trustees and administrators for why we should continue to invest in genocide is financial. Divesting our stock from weapons dealers or boycotting the products of certain firms will cost us money, they say, right? And that will end up harming students and workers alike. Dire warnings about funding shortfalls and thus the need for austerity have been a near constant in universities like UMass for a very long time now. They're a weapon wielded to justify almost any investment decision or spending cut. And since the university does face politicians who are hostile to its mission, the argument for austerity has an air of plausibility, at least until we look at the actual numbers. UMass Amherst and the UMass system have surplus and reserve funds in the hundreds of millions. UMass Amherst alone has run a campus surplus of $100 million or more for each of the past 4 years. Think about that number whenever they argue that we need to cut spending. The central UMass system has a stabilization fund of $164 million that remains untouched. These and other sources of revenue and savings, and these are just two of the key ones, are analyzed in detail in a forthcoming white paper about UMass budgetary decisions. In short, there's plenty of money. It's UMass priorities that are the problem. Administrators' calls for austerity are, as always, selective. To take a relatively small but revealing example, in 2024, UMass administrators spent over $500,000 to repress an anti-genocide encampment and then to whitewash their action by commissioning a report from a law firm sympathetic to the repression. Furthermore, it is by no means clear that divesting from weapons dealers would actually cost UMass anything. The same is true of fossil fuel investments. And here I recommend to you all a database available at the website Fossil Free Funds. It's fossilfreefunds.org. You can filter the database how you wish to select for high-performing investment funds that avoid industries like weapons and fossil fuels. Right? And there are literally dozens of high-performing investment funds that receive A grades for avoiding both weapons and fossil fuels. So divesting from violence is, in fact, compatible with good financial strategy. We know that our leaders are unlikely to be swayed by these arguments. The ethnic cleansing and extermination in the Palestinian territories and UMass's complicity in it won't end simply because we all have law, public opinion, and facts on our side. It will end when our movement imposes sustained economic and political costs on our targets through boycotts, divestment, strikes, aid flotillas, military sanctions, and other forms of collective disruption. The urgent question now is how we can expand the movement's capacity to do those things, learning from and building on the work of our movement ancestors. Thanks.